Welcome everyone to the Syracuse University Art Museum, both this wonderful crowd who joined us here at the museum and also those on Instagram. My name is Melissa Ewan. I am the interim chief curator here at the Art Museum, and I'm delighted to see all of you here today. Before we begin today's lunchtime lecture, I would like to begin by acknowledging with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous peoples on whose ancestral land Syracuse University now stands. And I am super excited to introduce Sue Wadley, Professor Emerita of Anthropology, to the museum today. She will be talking about these 8 paintings from the region of Mithila, and I have to say that she is not only a wealth of knowledge on these paintings because she has really dedicated her life to studying these works, but she also has been a wonderful friend and partner with the museum, and so I am delighted to turn it over to Sue.
Thank you. Thank you, and it's good to see everybody here. I'm going to urge everyone, as you have an opportunity, A, you can come closer, but B, make sure you look really carefully at how these are painted, because they all have very different styles and they all have a lot to say about art and how it's made. And I think they differ in many, many ways because of that. The Mithila region, for those of you who are a little bit less familiar, is on the Nepal border in the state of Bihar, so sort of split Delhi and Calcutta and go north. This region goes with up to the Nepal border. So when I was there, I was 30 miles away from the Nepal border. It's a land of lakes, of rivers, of lots of rain, so it's green, it's lush. I mostly have worked in Uttar Pradesh over near Delhi, where it's always dry, so I always loved being in Mithila because it was green and lush. It's a basically conservative region. The Mithili Brahmins dominate the region culturally and in many other ways, socially and economically, although not completely. And so everyone, when you hear Mithili, which is their word for it, you think about conservatism. And that sticks through the paintings in some ways. The paintings that we're looking at were originally started to be made on paper in the late 1960s. There was a man who was a British officer who was in Bihar when an earthquake hit the region, very famous earthquake actually, went way into Nepal as well in 1934. And he was out on his horse as a good officer checking out his communities and discovered that behind the mud walls, which he'd always been banished from entering as a man, not just a European man, but any man, basically, that's not a relative, were these gorgeous, gorgeous paintings on the walls. So he went back about 5 years later and photographed about 15 or 20 houses, the paintings that he found in them, and we have those from the British Museum. And it sort of sat there. He wrote an article in Indian art history magazine called Mark in 1949, and then it still sort of sat there. In the mid-1960s, there was a really severe famine in the region, and one of the women in Delhi who knew the tradition, Pupil Jayakar, who was also in the handicrafts field and head of the handicrafts organization, thought to send, guess what, a Bombay hippie guy, I mean, that's what he looked like to them, looks like to me when I look at the pictures, to Bihar to help the women transfer their paintings to paper. And so that's the origins of this tradition on paper. And the same size papers have been used basically ever since. I think it's actually British size. She can confirm that for me. This is the earliest one that we have. And I think you can very quickly see, and please come closer if you want. You can very quickly see that it's of a very different kind of style, basically. We think this was done in 1969 by a woman named Hema Devi. I didn't have anything to do with choosing these 8, so I was surprised to see it here because when I first looked at the really old ones that are in the SU collection, we have over 100 Mithila paintings now, and we have 50-some from this era. I thought it was really ugly, but I'm sort of glad to see it on the wall because it looks better here. This is Hanuman, one of the heroes, the monkey deity that also is a key player in the story of the Ramayana. So this is a Ramayana episode, and here he is throwing the ring that he's gotten from Ram to Sita, who is in the Ashoka Grove when she's incarcerated in Lanka. And here's the demonesses. They're very wonderful demonesses, right, who are guarding her. So this is a really, really famous scene, and this is probably one of the earliest versions that we have on paper. In fact, I don't think we have any others in the Ashu collection of that particular episode. The colors are very typical of the region. These were made by getting powders. I always call them holy colors from the Festival of Holi, but getting powders from the market and mixing them with either goat milk or gum and turning them into paints. And that was actually the way the paintings on the walls were done, according to Archer, my only informant, in the 1930s as well. So those were also not natural paints. Those were made from powders from the market. So it's the bright pinks, I mean, totally Indian color. Blues, greens, oranges, yellows. That's pretty much the palette that they're going to use for the next 20 years, more or less. This is in a style that gets defined as Barney, which means filled in. So relatively little line work and lots of filled in color. Those are the key things there. I'm going to talk a little fast. So the other one that is closest to that style, this is actually only 20 years old, but it's based on that Barney style, right? With much more delicate line work. The colors, she would have been using a bamboo nib with cotton or cloth wrapped around it to paint with. So she didn't have any, really good utensils. This one is done by Tara Devi and is dated 2003. And here we have the goddess Durga with her lion. Again, no, same colors, right? Pretty much. I mean, you can change the palette. You can emphasize some versus others, but those are still the colors that are primarily being used. Every painting has to have a border. It marks it off. It would have marked it off on a house as sacred space, and it marks it off here. When we've had two artists come to Syracuse, and when Rani Jha, who painted this one, was here in 2014, I think that's right. She was teaching a lesson. The first thing she do is you have to make a border. And I said, Ronnie, you'll never get to the figures if you have to spend the next hour making borders. But that's the first thing you do. And when I started studying with a different artist last spring, I spent a week making borders, drawing straight lines. You can't use a ruler. You gotta do it by yourself. And it's very, very heavy line work in that sense. These are much more cruder than what we would have today. The contrasting style, one other thing, that this style is associated with the Brahmin caste in the region, and caste hierarchy was and is still incredibly important. This is actually done by a Brahmin male, so we actually have two paintings here by men, who is a tantric priest as well. And he has a really constrained, as you can see, style here. Very, very linear. This is representative of a style that's called Kachni, which is line work, which is primarily associated with the Kayastha caste. I spent the last 2 weeks writing a paper, and in my explorations, I discovered that at least some of the scholars that have worked here think that the separation between these two styles that was made in the 1960s and 70s was propagated in part by a Brahmin family in one village and a Kayastha family, an accountant family in the other village. And they separated the styles in order to have better, clearer markets to compete with each other as well. So I'm intrigued by that possibility. Nowadays, the line style dominates, but the Kachni's on top of it. I don't know if we have a good example here. I don't think we do. But you'll find, Krishan Jha does it here. You put a, yes, he does. This is line work too in these. So the line work now goes into color much more efficiently, and sometimes there'll be a glaze, a mild piece of color on, say, a piece of the god's clothing, and then there'll be lines drawn over it in a different color, so that the Barney and the Kachni are totally merged in modern work. I think that one of the challenges of the Kachni work, of the modern work, is that it's incredibly linear, and the lines have to be precise. They have to be the same distance apart, even if you're just filling in the bits of a leaf, a little tiny leaf. The lines still can't go over the edges, and they have to be the same distance apart, et cetera, et cetera. After about a month of lines, I haven't drawn much since then, but at least it taught me how to think about it in ways that I think are really important. So this is a Brahmin. This is also a Ramayan, for those of you who know the story. Where are we? Anyone know? In the Ramayan story? This is Ravana, who is our anti-hero, the demon king of Lanka, supposedly. Here's Sita, being captured by him when she leaves the sacred space that Lakshman has drawn around her when Ram goes off to hunt a golden deer, and the bird vulture Jatayu sees her being kidnapped and comes to stop him, and here Ravana is killing Jatayu, whose body parts are falling to the ground, and the people on the ground are screaming in terror, right, knowing what's done. The one interesting piece about that story that I've always been intrigued by, I found an article when I was teaching women and gender studies a few years ago, that in places like Mumbai, the idea of Lakshman Rekha, which is the line of Lakshman, is used today, which is to protect a woman, is used today to control women, to control young girls. Don't do that, because you'll be breaking the Lakshman Rekha. You'll be breaking the rules we've set up for you about how women are supposed to behave. Curious. This is the other painting by a male painter. This is by Ram Brosjah. He's also Brahmin. Starting in about 2009, he started painting water. Anything to do with water, animal life, and so on. He was actually featured as the artist for a book from a place in South India called Tara Books, which does a lot of folk art publications. And it's all water life. And it was printed on handmade paper, and it's now sold around the world, and he's won all sorts of prizes for it. Each painting is a different kind of animal or fish or whatever from the ocean. This is his version of a mermaid. And the turtle is a very clear, common presentation in Mithila paintings. The lotus is, again, the careful line work, but the color also, right? So if we looked at an old style Kayasto painting, an old style Kachni painting, it would all just be black and white and maybe some red. So what you're getting here is the innovation of turning line work into color, which is really the dominant thing in the field these days. I'm going to go to the three modern ones in a minute. What's different there, guys, folks?
It uses cow dung.
Okay, it's got a cow dung wash on the background. What else? So these are Clokas paintings. These are paintings by Dalits previously who, generations ago were called untouchables and still are by some people. And they created very different style in the 1970s. They had not done any kind of very elaborate paintings on their houses. This was a group of people who were field laborers. The women and the men worked all the time in order to be able to feed their families. We're talking the lowest of the low in village communities in Bihar. Women were always threatened by male superiority of the landowners and others. I keep sending people to a wonderful story called Paddy Seeds by a Bengali writer called Manswati Devi. So if you want to learn about feudal life in Bihar, read that story. And so they didn't have a painting style aside from sort of mud reliefs, very primitive and crudely done on outside of their houses. A German scholar named Erika Moser-Schmidt came and was working there and helped the women develop a style based on their tattoos. So these small figures here are originally based on tattoo designs that they would have had around their neck to protect them. It was partially in replacement for the jewelry they could never own, right? It's also a very different color palette, mostly made originally for some years, at least, with natural dyes, because they couldn't afford to go to the market and buy the powders that the high casts were using to paint with. And this is the sun god, or goddess, we're not quite sure. This one came as a donation to the museum, and it came unsigned, so we don't know anything more about it. But it looks like a female face with a rosary. So their deities are the sun god, a Rahu. I don't remember how to explain who Rahu's a what? One of you. Romita's gone. But how do
I'm
we
about to go.
how do we explain who Rahu is in Hindu mythology?
Difficult to explain. You can say demigod.
A demigod, all right. He's a demigod who for the low caste people is very popular. They have another deity that they celebrate, who is a hero of their version of an epic, Raja Salesh. We don't have a representation of him here. He's often in one of these paintings. And one of the things that's really notable is that the images are just, not only are they made differently, and I want you all to go look at these closely when we're done here, but they're different in terms of that. These are elephants. We have some people down here, some more people up there. They often have lions, they have tigers, they have birds, they have parrots in them. And these are images that we're not finding in any of the high caste paintings. The only elephant you find in a high caste painting is one that's the vehicle of some deity that's associated, like Indrani, or something marking auspiciousness. So the Dalits are in part representing the world they live in, which is a much more natural world, a much less controlled world. I like to think of she's not a very good example of all the flowers and things that we see in these high caste paintings is the flowers that the women know from their small compound gardens, or that the flower grower brings to them for rituals. And the world of the Dalit community is really the world of the forest. And in one piece by one of the best young artists, he was writing about their worship ceremonies for something I saw in October. He said all we need to worship is 4 trees in a forest. And then we have a temple. We don't have to have bricks and mortar. So think about these as representing a really natural world, and these representing a controlled world. And one of the reasons that these are representing a controlled world is these women are out there in the forest, in the fields, not at home, not barricaded in, not behind bars, all the time. The high caste women were secluded in Purda in their houses, and they weren't allowed to leave. And so their world is one that's very constrained and very constricted, and I think the paintings capture some of that difference. This is by Rani Jha, who was one of the artists, the one I was talking about, who started with Borders. That was here in 2014 for a couple of weeks. This is about how you have to have female help in order for women to be able to get through the secluded, recently married daughter image that we have here. I mean, that's just what it was. You know, any pictures that we see of a bride, she's always like this, right? That's how she's painted, because she's secluded, she's covered, she's in purdah, she has sari over her face. She's not allowed to go out very much. And so these women are the ones that eventually helped her, and she says, this is Rani. Now, in various versions of this story, this person is Tula and I. In others, it's her mother-in-law. So Tula and I brought her to Syracuse in 2014. So and she brought this painting with her as a tribute.
We made a film about her also. Yeah.
There is a film. There's film about several of these people. Yeah. Ron Barros is in the film. They didn't put the film on display for
Charlene.
I won't get to her yet. So this is very, again, it's a kind of merger of styles, right? You might also notice that in many instances, the border reflects what's in the painting, so there'll be some image from the painting or some set of colors that tie them together. So she's got a lot of Kutchmi work in here, and then she's got the huge spaces. And this is actually somewhat unusual in that it is blue, so it's filled in, but it's not densely filled in. The early painters, I used a style that doesn't quite capture it, and the Ashoka Grove doesn't quite capture it, that I call scattered flower fill. They're just lots and lots of flowers wherever there was empty space, you fill in with flowers. So you could have an image of Krishna and Radha, walking, and Krishna's got his flute, and then every space that's not them is filled with flowers, just random kinds of flowers, but all the styles that they have learned to paint. So this is Radha, and again, a very different palette. This is a very modern palette, right, when you compare to that or that. Ram Burros kind of hangs in with the modern palette, or the old palette, but he shifts it somewhat. Where are we? This is by Shalini Kumari, who I consider one of the most innovative of the Mithila artists today. This was done when she was barely 20 years old. It was in an exhibition in California in 2009, which was the first ever exhibition, solo exhibition by a Mithila artist in a gallery in the US. It's the first piece that I bought for more money than I thought I should. I have written about the idea of Shakti, which is what this is about. This is about female power. Shakti means the power that drives the universe, but it always starts with women. If the women don't create Shakti through their obedience and their power and their performance of the rituals, etc., their men don't have power either. They have to earn it and transfer it to their men. But Shalini's, the story behind this, and I can't emphasize enough how different this is in 2009 from what anyone else was painting, even if you look at some of these others that are a little bit more modern, right? In terms of the way she takes the tradition and then just really transform it. Still line work, you still know it's Mithila work, but it is really, really massively different in other kinds of ways. This is a story about her cousin who had a child and barely survived the birth of the child. And it was an older cousin who was going to school, working on a PhD. Shalini looked up to her. She really loved her. She cared about her immensely. The doctors say she should never get pregnant again because she's really a mess. her innards are really a mess. Don't let her get pregnant again. And her in-laws didn't listen, and she was pregnant again, and she died at childbirth. And Shalini was enormously upset about that. And so she painted this this is the inner woman. It's not an inner deity, it's an inner woman. It's this woman, right? Who is learning to speak up, right? She says what we have to do as women is we have to learn to use our voices. We have to learn to speak up. We have to learn to use our power. We need to fight back. And so this is truly her view of pushing back, taking the power of women, the fire that you have as your own energy from your own voice, from your own thoughts, and fighting against the system. That's where this piece is coming from. And you'll also know, when you have a chance to look at it closely, that this edge is all jagged, which I had not noted originally, but one of my colleagues, which Shalini was speaking about this here in 2018, said, why is the edge jagged? And she said, because it's painful. Mm-hmm. This is about pain. Okay? That takes us to this piece, which is by a young artist named Gunjeshwari Kumari, done about 2011, 2012. Shalini and Gunjeshwari were students at something called the Mithila Art Institute, which was a place where they got free lessons. They had to compete. They had a year of lessons, and then the very, very exceptional ones got another year. Their teacher eventually was Rani Jha, who brought a feminist leaning to much of what they did. Rani's work is probably the best feminist work in the early 2000s around. So Gunjeshwari was a student of hers. Shalini knew her really well, but I don't think ever was actually trained by her. This is about female abortions. This is about the young women who never made it to life, because India practices pretty heavy female feticide. up to 500,000 feticides a year if you look at the figures. The number ranges, but that's the kind of high end I've found today, right? And so here's the mother dreaming of the daughter that she might never have, or has already lost, I'm not quite sure, who's going to end up a flower in a tree because that's the only life she's going to have. So we have here, as I understand it, the groom and his bride discussing her pregnancy. Here we have the mother taking the bride, guess where, to the clinic, the gynecological clinic, where they do a sonogram, they identify it as female, and they abort the fetus. And Ronnie, who has written and painted about this, said that when she had a famous painting about it, one of the local gynecologists called her up and said, why are you calling me a cobra? Because in that painting, Ronnie made the gynecologist a cobra because she would like a cobra, it would kill you, right? And she said, well, I didn't call you a cobra unless you do these surgeries. If you don't do them, you're not a cobra, right? So just don't do them. And she said it's also better to be caught by a cobra than by a female gynecologist because you'll lose if you're a female with her. The cobra sometimes lets people live, right? And so here we have the story of violence against women in the earliest stages of female life. These females that doesn't have, she's dreaming of her daughter to end up in a tree. The male doesn't really have a choice. The mother-in-law rules in these. And so she goes off to the clinic and has the abortion. The tragedy with this piece is that we discovered in April, when we were confirming her name for this exhibition, is that this young woman was murdered by her in-laws about a year and a half ago. And I should put the term murder in quotes. She was either murdered literally, or she was harassed to the point that she was forced to commit suicide, which to me is murder too, in a different meaning of its right. Yeah. This has really rocked the Mithila art community because they had kept it very secret. She didn't really know about it. The husband of this young woman was jailed for 3 or 4 months. He's now out on bail. His mother and aunt, who would have been part of the murder come harassment, had absconded, disappeared into the Bihari jungles, if you like. But she's a good painter. She would have had exhibitions in Delhi, so it was a challenge. So one of the things that's happening is a year and a half from now, we're going to have an exhibition here of Mithila paintings about violence against women. Melissa and I have planned that for the fall of '24, and there'll be an online exhibition about Mithila painters talking about female violence sometime in the next 6 months when I get it finished. We all organize ourselves. But I wanted to share one new piece. So this is by Shalini, who's the Shakti lady down there, right, the top at the end. When she knew Gunjeshwari, she knew her work. Shalini paints about women all the time. And she was horrified. I mean, she was just completely taken aback. She and I are good friends, we talk a lot. And she said, I had started a painting about women, and it turned into a painting about Gunjeshwari. And so this is her painting in honor of Gunjeshwari. This will be part of the SU collection when we finish this talk. So here we have Gunjeshwari. She had a son and a daughter, so they're clinging to her legs. Right? There's a little boy here and a little girl here. And these are the husband and the mother-in-law who are kind of enroping her in rope, right? They're both holding a rope and they're tying it around her. These are the neighbors and family that don't do anything to stop it, right? And these are her friends who are collecting flowers to remember her, and her parents who are distraught by all that's happened. And Shalini likes to use this image these days of the circle of marriage, that once you enter the marriage circle, once you become married and you enter this circle, you can't get out. And so this is partially what she's written. Here's the girl moving in. She can go around the circle, but she can never exit it because she's caught by the ropes of marriage.
What does circle represent?
For her, it just represents the marriage, right? It's,
Maybe Lakshman Rekha?
possibly. I've never heard her use that phrase. I'll ask her. Right? The bride's footprints, feet are decorated this way for the marital ceremony. So this is, you can think about it as the footprints of the bride. And of course, in the marriage ceremony itself, the bride and groom have to circle the sacred fire 7 times. So there's all sorts of ways you can think about how you might want to read this piece, right? The lotus was a flower. So this is 2022 December. So this is the newest, a new piece. Here you have the black and red of the old style. She's Brahmin, by the way. The black and red of the old style Cayster paintings. So it captures that, but it's in a completely different style, completely different mode. Compare it to that, which would be very traditional from the 80s and 70s to this. You've got transforming taste. So I'm glad to take questions, but that's, I think I managed to do it.
Yes, you did.
We didn't stop her yet. Yes?
So now is it legal to find out the sex of the fetus?
It's not legal to do these abortions, but people do them anyway. There's literally thousands of done a year. And Bihar itself, to go back to the dowry and to Gunjeshwari's death and whether or not you could call it, they wanted money from her because her daughter was sick. That was part of the issue. But she was also, would have finished her training to be a teacher and have a job this fall if she hadn't been murdered. So who knows all the ins and outs of that one. Bihar has 3,000 dowry deaths a year.
3,000?
3,000 dowry deaths in Bihar, the state of Bihar, a year. It's 3 every day. That's
So
the ones
I
they
come
know
from
about.
Bihar.
Huh?
I come from Bihar.
Well, I'm only telling you what the news tells us.
And yes, you have an artist opinion, but this is not what the Bihar I know.
Well,
yeah.
The 3,000 deaths in a year are the newspaper reports and the government records. So I can't argue with that. You can argue about whether this is the Bihar you know. Remember that this is a conservative community. Not everybody that's mightily is conservative, but comes from a conservative community in many ways. Other thoughts or questions?
Is there a continuity in style between these older works of art and the newer ones?
Well, I think so.
Materials or style?
Well, the materials are now acrylic paints. So this would be acrylic and much, obviously good pens and good brushes. She uses nibs and black ink and red paint, black ink and red acrylic. So there's differences there. The color palettes recur periodically. Yeah.
I was about to say, traditionally there was always a border like that.
Yes.
But now the border is just a linear border.
It's
So
not a linear border. It's a decorated linear border.
But it's much more. But in the original ones that we have, it's always a border like this, with the flowers or the leaves.
Well,
This I'm talking about this border here.
yeah. So she's got the flowers on the outside and the black
Yes,
border
but
there.
you said it is different.
I don't think it. Yeah, I think it's still the border. The borders change depending on what the painting is. So her border from 10 years ago is jagged, right?
So the jagged edges are very common because the traditional Mithila paintings were done to decorate the houses
Right.
and the doors, and you would see those jagged edges because if you see in this too, there's a jagged edge over here. That's very common edging.
Okay.
Yeah.
Most of the artists are doing
Yeah.
what Krishnan and Jha is doing there. They pick something that represents the colors and the ideas they have and use that to make the border these days.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
I'm somewhat interested in this area.
India did not have a census since 2011.
Right.
2021 census was postponed for whatever reasons. But they're having some what's called a sampling and a statistical. And they publish that every year. And that is not actually counting person to person, but they take a sample and from that they statistically derive what it is. What I have heard that the sex ratio in Bihar is in favor of women. There are more women than men. The sex ratio is still tilted towards men in Haryana, Punjab, in that area, northwest.
I have not found any evidence of that in Bihar.
Yeah, but in Bihar and Bengal also, the ratio has changed. It's almost equal.
Well, that would only
992.
be with the last people
Last-
born in the
last
last
1 or 2
10,
years.
maybe the last couple
Yeah,
of years.
last 2
but
years or so.
It's definitely not historical.
No.
And the Bihari
Yeah,
literacy rate for women in
Very low.
2011 was 39%.
yeah.
Men was only 47%.
Well, it has
So-
changed now.
I know, but we don't have the recent ones, so I'm giving you the best I have.
But you are absolutely right. The women literacy rate is, especially in villages,
Yes,
quite
it's
low.
very low.
Maybe something like 20%, 25%. But the overall, it's about, in women, it's about 51 or something like that now. I may be off by a few percentage points.
Most of the schools closed, of course, for COVID, so there was, like here, huge amounts of lack of education for people.
All right, if there are no further questions, I would like to thank Sue for joining us today. Before we conclude, I have a few additional announcements. So this afternoon, as we speak, the artists Emilio Rojas and Kantushka Mello are performing in our galleries in response to Robert Smithson's double non-site, California and Nevada. Tomorrow, Rojas will return to campus and offer a workshop related to the Smithson and his own performance practice. Come find me and we can chat more about this if you're interested in attending the workshop. Next week, on Wednesday, April 12th at 5:30, we will have another performance, this time by graduate student Amarachi Atama. Amarachi will be offering a chant performance in response to the work of Rena Banerjee, currently on view in our galleries as well. We have a number of upcoming events in addition to the ones that I briefly mentioned. So please visit our website, museum.syr.edu, to check out our events page for further information. So again, I want to thank Sue for joining us today, and all of you for being here at the museum. And I hope to see you all in the galleries soon. Thank you.